I've been waiting way too long. Yeah, I've been down here trying to get it. Yeah, I've been waiting way too long.
This is the video for Algebra Unit 7, Lesson 1. The first way we're going to factor is with GCF. So what is GCF? GCF is greatest common factor. A factor is a number that can be multiplied with another number to get another number or answer. So in order to find the GCF, let's just look at two integers. So we have 36 and 12. So we want the largest factor that they have in common. So what are factors of 36? 1, 2, 3, 4, not 5, 6, not 7, not 8, 9, yes, 9 times 4, 10, no, 11, no, 12, yes, 12 times 3, and 13, no, 14, 15, then we would get to 18, 18 times 2, and then, of course, 36. So those are all the factors of 36. Factors of 12 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. That's it. So the greatest common factor, so what's the largest number that they have in common? Well, they both have a 12, so 12 would actually be the greatest common factor here. So that's what I mean by greatest common factor. The largest number that you could divide out, basically, is what we're going to be doing. So let's look at an actual example. So remember, this is a polynomial. Specifically, this is a binomial because it has two terms. And we're going to see if we can factor this using the greatest common factor. So what are the factors of 4x squared? Factors of 4x squared are obviously 4 times x squared, but I can break that down even further. 4 is the same as 2 times 2. X squared is the same as x times x. So when I factor that term, that is how I would factor that. 2 times 2 times x times x. Now when I factor minus 3x, I would get negative 3 times x. And there you can't simplify, well, you could simplify to negative 1 times 3 times x, but that's not really going to help us because we don't have those in common. So what is the greatest common factor? So what do they have in common? Well, the only thing they have in common is an x. So that's what we're going to do is we're going to factor out, which means we're going to divide by x. So if I divide 4x squared divided by x, I'm left with 4x. So my factored term is going to come on the outside. That's the x is what I've divided by. That's the greatest common factor. The result of the division goes on the inside. So 4x will still be on the inside. And when I divide negative 3x divided by x, x over x is 1, so I'm left with negative 3. So I'm just going to put a minus 3 back here. So this is the factored version of what we started with. Okay, we didn't solve anything, we just factored it. And then what I can do is I can check my answer. So if I multiply this, what do I get when I multiply? X times 4x is 4x squared. We just studied that. X times negative 3 is negative 3x, which is indeed what I started with. Therefore, that is correct. So you can very easily check your work on these and not have to ask someone if you're doing it right. You just need to multiply it back out and see if you got what you started with. Let's try another example. 10y cubed plus 20y squared minus 5y. So we're going to try to do this without writing out all the individual factors. So what can we think about they have in common? Well, first just look at the coefficients. Okay, 10, 20, and negative 5. So between 10, 20, and negative 5, what is the largest number that we can divide all of those by? Probably negative 5. And you could actually divide by a negative or a positive. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to go ahead and divide out actually just by a positive 5. So I know that I'm going to divide by 5 on the outside, which is going to leave me with 2 something plus 4 something minus 1 something. Okay, because I just divided the coefficients. Now what about the y's? I have y cubed, y squared, and y to the first power. So the greatest common factor between those, y cubed, y squared, and y, is actually just y to the first power. So what is y cubed over y? Remember, we subtract, so this is y to the first, so this would be y squared. So this is going to be 2y squared. I'm dividing out a y, so the y comes on the outside. So again, just look, if you multiply 5y times 2y squared, you would get 10y cubed, which is what we started with. Okay, what happens when I divide y squared divided by y? I just have y. And what happens when I divide y divided by y? I just get 1, not y, just 1. So there is no y in the last term, and that would be my answer. So again, I can check by multiplying out. 5y times 2y squared is 10y cubed. 5y times 4y is positive 20y squared. And 5y times negative 1 is negative 5y, which is what I started with. So I just want to be very clear here that this is the answer that I'm looking for. And what I've done in green is just simply a way to check that my answer is correct, to check that I do indeed get what I started with. The last thing we're going to look at is called factor by grouping. And so in this problem, you can see that I have 9x multiplied by x plus 4 minus 5 multiplied by 4 plus x. Okay, well, 4 plus x is the same as x plus 4, so I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it like that. Addition is commutative, meaning it can move around, so that's the same thing. So you should notice here that the x plus 4 is the same in both terms. So what this means is I can take out the 9x and the minus 5 and move that to the front, and then I can multiply that times x plus 4, and I would still get my original answer, my original problem that I was working with. This is just a cleaner way of writing it. So if you want to factor by grouping, you have to have this common piece here. They have to be the same thing in order to do that. So let's look at another example. So this one is not as straightforward. So we have 12a cubed minus 9a squared plus 20a minus 15. So we want to try to look at just these two terms and see if we can find a common factor, greatest common factor within those two. So what is the greatest common factor between 12 and 9? It would be 3. What is the greatest common factor between a cubed and a squared? Well, that would actually be a squared, would be a common factor there, the greatest. So 12 divided by 3 is 4. A cubed divided by a squared is a. So what I'm doing here is I'm dividing this term by what I'm factoring out to get this answer here. So now I'm going to divide negative 9a squared divided by 3a squared. Negative 9a squared divided by 3a squared. Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. A squared divided by a squared is 1. So it's actually just a minus 3. Okay, so that's how you would factor those two terms. Then I have to make sure I put my plus sign here. And I need to find out what is the common factor between 20a and minus 15. Well, there's not an a in the last term, so I can't factor out an a, but I can factor out a 5. So I'm going to put a plus 5 there. So now I'm going to divide both of these terms by 5. 20a divided by 5. 20a divided by 5 is actually 4a. And negative 15 divided by 5 is negative 3. So what do we notice? We notice that, again, those are matching terms. So my final answer is going to be 3a squared plus 5. Okay, so I group that with that, times what they have in common, 4a minus 3. So that is how you factor by grouping. Let's look at this example. Negative 3x squared times x plus 2 plus 4 times x minus 2. So remember we said they have to be in common here. Okay, notice that x plus 2 is not the same as x minus 2. Therefore, this cannot be factored by grouping. So please just be careful and make sure you're noticing the patterns and not just assuming that you can do something with it. It's possible that it can't be simplified the way that we are trying to simplify these.
I've been waiting way too long. Yeah.